Hello and welcome to Classical Literature, the show that invites you to put on your wizard hat and robes. So the last time we checked in with King Arthur, he had knocked a dude off a horse so hard that he died, gotten himself a queen, and got some fancy new furniture. This time we will be shifting focus a little bit, to think more on Merlin and his magical, mystical self. But before we get there, first we must read the foreword. Here beginneth the second book of the history of King Arthur, called the Book of Three Worthies, because it has to do with three very excellent, honorable lords of the court of King Arthur. Of these three, the first is Merlin the Wise, the second is Sir Pelleas, surnamed the Gentle Knight, and the third is Sir Gawain, the son of King Lot of Orkney in the Isles. So now presently follows the story of the passing of Merlin the Wise, in which you shall see how the very wisdom that Merlin possessed in such great measure was the cause of his own undoing. Wherefore I do hope that you yourselves may take that story unto heart, so that you shall see that those gifts of mind or person which God assigns unto you may not be so misused by you or others, that they shall become the means of compassing your own downfall. For it shall not excuse you in any wise that, as you journey forward in your life, you shall find many men who, like Merlin, have been endowed by the grace of God with very great gifts of talent, which they might very easily use to the great benefit of mankind, but which they so misuse as to bring the greater ruin upon themselves, and the greater harm unto other men. For if you shall prove so weak or so wicked as to misuse your talents in that manner unto the harm of others and of yourself, it shall not make your fault the less, that others shall have done greater evil than yourself. Wherefore let this story of Merlin be a warning unto you, I pray you all. For, though I do not believe that Merlin intended that his talents of magic should do harm unto others, yet, because of his folly, they did as great harm as though he himself had designed to do evil by means of them. Yea, it is hard to tell whether the wickedness or the follies of men do the greater harm in the world. Therefore seek to guard yourself well, not only against sin, but against folly and weakness likewise. Prologue. Upon a certain day King Arthur sat in the royal hall of Camelot with the queen and all of his court and all of her court, and there was great joy and mirth at that place. Whiles they sat there suddenly came an armed knight into the hall, and his armor was all covered with blood and dust, and he had a great many wounds upon his body. Then all they who were at that place were astonished and affrighted at the aspect of that knight, for his appearance boded no good news to King Arthur. The knight messenger came to where the king was, and he was nearly fainting with weakness, and with the many wounds he had received. And he brought news unto those who were there present that 5 kings, enemies to King Arthur, had suddenly come into that land, and that they were burning and harrying the country upon every side. And the knight messenger said that these 5 kings were the King of Denmark, the King of Ireland, the King of Solis, the King of the Vale, and the King of Longtenace. These had brought with them a great host, and were laying waste the land all round about, so that all the realm was in sore travail and sorrow because of their devastations. Upon this news, King Arthur smote his palms together with great vehemence, and cried out, Alas, who would be a king? Will the time never come when these wars and disturbances shall cease, and we shall have entire peace in this land? Therewith he arose in great agitation, and went out from that place, and all who were there were in sore trouble. So King Arthur immediately sent messengers to 2 friendly kings who were nearest to him, to wit, King Pellinore and to King Urien of Gore, and he bade them to come to his aid without any loss of time. Meantime he himself gathered together a large army, with intent to go forth to meet his enemies forthwith. So he went forth, and upon the 3rd day he came with his army unto the forest of Tintagilon. and there he stayed with intent to rest for a little until King Pellinore and King Uriens should have joined him. But the 5 kings, his enemies, had news that King Arthur was at that place, and thereupon they made a forced march through North Wales with intent to strike him ere those other 2 kings could come to his aid. So they came by night to where King Arthur was, and they fell upon him so unexpectedly that there was great danger of his army being put to rout before that assault. But King Arthur drew his army together by his own courage and large-heartedness, and so they defended themselves with a great spirit until King Pellinore appeared with his army and joined in that battle. So in the end, King Arthur won a great victory over his enemies, for they were put to rout and scattered in every direction. Likewise, by means of that war, and because of the submissions of these 5 kings, King Arthur recovered all that realm that had once been his father's, and more besides. Now in that war 8 of the knights of the Round Table lost their lives, and King Arthur mourned their loss with great dolour. For these were the first knights of the Round Table who had lost their lives in doing battle in his defence. Whilst King Arthur was grieving very sorely for these 8 knights, Merlin came unto him and said, Be not downcast, Lord, for lo, thou hast many excellent knights still left about thee, and thou canst certainly not have a very great deal of trouble in filling those 8 places that have been thus made empty by death. Now if thou followest my counsel, thou must choose some very worthy adviser from the Knights Companion of thy Round Table, and thou wilt consult with him in this manner, for the counsel of 2 is better than the counsel of 1, and between ye may fill those places made vacant by war. This counsel appeared very good to King Arthur, so he did as Merlin advised. For that morning he summoned King Pellinore to his privy closet, and laid the matter before him, and they 2 communed together thereupon. In that consultation King Pellinore advised King Arthur in this wise, that there should be 4 old and worthy knights chosen to fill 4 of those empty seats, and that there should be 4 young and ardent knights chosen to fill the other 4 seats, and in that manner all those 8 seats should be filled. Now that advice appeared to King Arthur to be good, wherefore he said, Let it be that way. So first they 2 chose the 4 old knights as follows. There was King Urien of Gore, and King Lac, and Sir Hervace de Rule, and Sir Galar of Rouge. And from the younger knights of the court they chose Sir Marvace of Leslie, and Sir Lionel, the son of King Ban of Benwick, and Sir Cadar of Cornwall, so that there was 1 place yet to be filled. Now, it was a very hard thing to determine who should fill that place, for there were at that time 2 very honourable young knights at the court. One of these was Sir Bodmagus, a young knight, brother of Sir Owain, and son of King Urien of Gore and Queen Morgana La Fay, which lady was half-sister unto King Arthur, as hath been aforetold. And the other young knight was Sir Tor, who, though late come to the court, had performed several very famous adventures. And Sir Tor was a son of King Pellinore, though not of his queen, and King Pellinore loved him a very great deal. Then King Pellinore said to King Arthur, Lord, there are certainly but 2 knights in all thy court to choose from, for to fill this 8th seat at the Round Table. One of these is thy sister's son, Sir Bodmagus, and the other is my son, Sir Tor. Now I may not advise thee in this matter, wherefore do thou, Lord, choose the one or the other of these young knights to fill that place. But this I may say, that it will please me very greatly if thy favour should fall upon Sir Badmagus, for then will all the world believe that I have been above reproach in my dealings in this affair. Whereas should Sir Tor be chosen, all men would say that I favoured mine own son. Then King Arthur meditated upon this matter for a long while, and by he spoke, and said, Sir, I have weighed this whole affair, and it is my belief that Sir Tor is the better knight of those twain, for he hath performed several very excellent adventures, whilst Sir Bodmagus, though a worthy knight, hath not yet made manifest any very great achievement in the fields of chivalry. So in God's name let Sir Tor be seated as companion of the Round Table. Then King Pellinore said, So be it, And thereupon they both arose and went forth from that place. And lo, that very moment the names of those 8 worthies so chosen appeared each upon the back of the seat at the Round Table that appertained unto him. And so the decision of those 2 knights was confirmed in the sight of all the world in that manner. Now, when the word of all this reached the ears of Queen Morgana La Fay, she was greatly affronted that Sir Bodmagus, her son, should have been passed by, and that another should have been chosen in his stead. Wherefore she cried out against King Arthur in the hearing of several people, saying, Ha! How is this? Is blood and kinship of no account in the eyes of this king, that he passes by so worthy a knight as his own nephew to choose one who is not of lawful birth in his stead? Now, my husband's house has suffered many grievous ills at the hands of King Arthur, for lo, he hath taken away our royal power, and hath made us little better than captives in his own court. This in itself is as great an affront as though we were his bitter enemies instead of his nigh kin. But this that he hath now done to my son in thus passing him by is a greater affront than that other. And Queen Morgana Le Fay spake in this wise not only to King Uriens, who was her husband, but to Sir Owain and to Sir Badmagus, who were her sons. But King Uriens of Gore rebuked her for her speech, for he had grown to love King Arthur very much, because of the high nobility of his nature, and likewise Sir Owain rebuked her, saying that he would listen to no ill thing said of King Arthur, for that not only did he love King Arthur better than anyone else in all the world, but that the king was at once the looking-glass of all knighthood, and likewise the very fountainhead of honour. So spake these 2, but Sir Badmagus hearkened to what his mother, Queen Morgana, said, for he was very angry with King Arthur, because the king had passed him by. Wherefore he took his departure from the court without asking leave of King Arthur, and went errant in quest of adventure. And at this King Arthur was very sorry. Now, as aforesaid, Queen Morgana Le Fay spake her indignation to several other people of the court, so that word thereof came at last to the ears of King Arthur, and grieved him a very great deal. So when Queen Morgana came to him one day, and besought his leave for to quit the court, he spake to her with great sadness of spirit, saying, My sister, I am very sorry that you are not pleased with what I have done in this matter, for God knows that I have endeavoured to do to the best of my power. And though I would rather a great deal that Sir Badmagus were a fellow of the Round Table, yet it is my very honest belief that, for several reasons, Sir Tor had best right to a seat at that table. Now if I choose otherwise than according to my right judgment, what virtue would the Round Table have, seeing that I should have shown favour unto a man because of his kinship to me? Then Queen Morgana Le Fay said with great heat, Sir, all that you say only adds to the affront that our house hath sustained at your hands. For now you not only deny my son that seat, but you belittle him by comparing him to his disadvantage with this low-born knight whom you have chosen. Now the only pleasure that I can have in talking to you is to beseech you to let me go away from this place. Then King Arthur, speaking with great dignity, said, Lady, it shall be as you would have it, and you shall go whithersoever it pleases you, for God forbid that I should stay you in your wishes. Moreover, I shall see to it that you shall not depart from this place without such a court for company as may very well befit one who is the wife of one king and the sister of another. And so he did as he said he would do, for he sent Queen Morgana Le Fay away from his court with great honour and in high estate of circumstance. But the more patient King Arthur was with her, and the more he showed her favour, the more the angry Queen Morgana Le Fay was with him, and the more she hated him. So she betook her way to an estuary of the sea, and there she dismissed those whom the king had sent with her, and embarked with her own court in several ships, betaking her way to that enchanted isle, hight Avalon, which was her home. The island of Avalon was a very strange, wonderful land, such as was not to be seen anywhere else in all the world, for it was like a paradise of beauty, being covered all over with divers gardens of flowers, intermingled with plantations of fair trees, some bearing fruit, and others all abloom with blossoms. And besides these were many terraces of lawns, and smooth slopes of grass laying all about the borders of the island, and overlooking the sea from tall white walls of pure marble. And in the midst of these gardens and orchards and plantations and lawns and terraces were a multitude of castles and towers, built up the one above the other, some as white as snow, and others very gay with many colors. And the greatest marvel of that wonderful island was this, that in the midst of all those castles and towers was a single tower, built entirely of lodestone. And in that lay the great mystery of that place. For the island floated upon the surface of the water, and that tower of lodestone possessed such a potency that Avalon would float from place to place, according to the will of Queen Morgana La Fay, so that sometimes it would be here, and sometimes it would be there, as that royal lady willed it to be. Nor was there a very many people who had seen that island, for some whiles it would be all covered over with a mist of enchantment like to silver, so that no eyes could behold it unless they were fey. But sometimes it had been seen, as it were a vision of paradise. What time he who beheld it would hear gay voices sounding from its lawns and plantations, very thin and clear because of the great distance, for no one ever came nigh to Avalon unless by authority of Queen Morgana La Fay. And he would hear music of so sweet a sort that it was likely that his soul would grow all faint because of the music. Then Avalon would suddenly disappear very marvelously, and he who had seen it would be aware that it was not likely that he would ever see it again. Such was the island of Avalon, and if you would read of it more particularly, you shall find much about it in a certain book written in French and called Auguste de Danse. Queen Morgana Le Fay loved this island a very great deal, and it is said by many that King Arthur is yet alive in that place, lying there very peacefully and tranquilly while he awaits that certain time when he shall return unto the world to make right all that is wrong therein. So it is I have told you of it, with these particulars, at this place. Part 1. The Story of Merlin. Here followeth a particular account of the enchantment of Merlin by a certain damsel hight Vivian, and of all the circumstances thereunto appertaining. Likewise, it is to be narrated how King Arthur was betrayed by his own sister, and of how he would certainly have been slain only for the help of that same enchantress Vivian, who was the cause of Merlin's undoing. Also, it shall be told how the sheath of Excalibur was lost at that time. Chapter 1. How Queen Morgana Le Fay meditated evil against King Arthur, and how she sent a damsel to beguile the enchanter, Merlin. Now, Morgana Le Fay was a very cunning enchantress, and was so much mistress of magic that she could, by means of potent spells, work her will upon all things, whether quick or dead. For Merlin himself had been her master in times past, and had taught her his arts whilst she was still a young damsel at the court of Uther Pendragon. So it was that next to Merlin she was, at that time, most potent enchanter in all the world. Nevertheless, she lacked Merlin's foreknowledge of things to happen, and his gift of prophecy thereupon, for these things he could not impart unto anyone, wherefore she had not learned them of him. Now after Queen Morgana Le Fay had come to the island of Avalon as aforetold, she brooded a great deal over that affront which she deemed King Arthur had placed upon her house, and the more she brooded upon it, the more big did it become in her mind. Wherefore at last it seemed to her that she could have no pleasure in life, unless she could punish King Arthur for that which he had done. Yea, she would have been glad to see him dead at her feet because of the anger that she felt against him. But Queen Morgana was very well aware that she could never do the king, her brother, an injury so long as Merlin was there to safeguard him. For Merlin would certainly foresee any danger that might threaten the king, and would counteract it. Wherefore she was aware that if she would destroy the king, she must first destroy Merlin. Now, There was at the court of Queen Morgana Le Fay a certain damsel of such marvellous and bewitching beauty, that her like was hardly seen by all in the world. This damsel was 15 years old, and of royal blood, being the daughter of the King of Northumberland, and her name was Vivien. This damsel, Vivien, was both wise and cunning beyond all measure for one so young. Moreover, she was without any heart, being cold and cruel to all who were contrary minded to her wishes. So because she was so cunning and wise, Queen Morgana liked her and taught her many things of magic and sorcery, which she knew. But, notwithstanding all that Queen Morgana did for her, this maiden did not feel any love for her mistress, being altogether devoid of heart. One day, this damsel and Queen Morgana Le Fay sat together in a garden of that magic island of Avalon, and the garden was upon a very high terrace and overlooked the sea. And the day was very fair, and the sea so wonderfully blue, that it appeared to be as though the blue sky had melted into water, and the water into sky. As Vivien and the Queen sat in this beautiful place, the Queen said to the damsel, "Vivien, what wouldst thou rather have than anything else in all the world?" To which Vivien replied, "Lady, I would rather have such wisdom as thou hast than anything else." Then Queen Morgana laughed and said, "It is possible for thee to be as wise as I am, and wiser too, if so be thou wilt do according to my ordination. For I know a way in which thou mayest obtain wisdom." "How may I obtain this wisdom, lady?" said Vivien. Then Queen Morgana Le Fay said, "Hearken, I will tell thee. Thou must know that Merlin, whom thou hast several times seen at the court of King Arthur, is the master of all the wisdom that is possible for anyone to possess in this world. All that I know of magic Merlin hath taught me, and he knoweth many things that he did not teach me, but which he withheld from me. For Merlin taught me when I was a young damsel at the court of my mother's husband, because I was beautiful in his eyes. For Merlin loveth beauty above all things else in the world, and so he taught me many things of magic, and was very patient with me. But Merlin hath a gift which belongeth to him, and which he cannot communicate to anyone else, for it is instinct with him. That gift is the gift of foreseeing into the future, and the power of prophesying thereupon. And though he may foresee the fate of others, still he is blind to his own fate. For so he confessed to me several times that he could not tell what was to happen in his own life, when that happening concerned himself alone. Now thou, Vivien, art far more beautiful than I was at thine age, wherefore I believe that thou wilt easily attract the regard of Merlin unto thee. And if I give thee, besides, a certain charm which I possess, I may cause it to be that Merlin may love thee so much that he will impart to thee a great deal more of his wisdom than ever he taught me when I was his disciple. But thou art to know, Vivien, that in winning this gift of knowledge from Merlin, thou wilt put thyself in great peril. For by and by, when the charm of thy beauty shall have waned with him, then he may easily regret what he hath done in imparting his wisdom to thee, in which case there will be great danger that he may lay some spell upon thee to deprive thee of thy powers. For it would be impossible that both thou and he could live in the same world, and each of ye know so much cunning of magic." Now unto all this Vivien listened with a great deal of attention, and when Queen Morgana had ended, the damsel said, "Dear lady, all that thou tellest me is very wonderful, and I find myself possessed with a vehement desire to attain such knowledge in magic as that. Wherefore, if thou wilt help me in this matter, so that I may beguile his wisdom from Merlin, thou wilt make of me a debtor unto thee for as long as I may live. And touching the matter of any danger that may fall to me in this affair, I am altogether willing to assume that. For I have a great hope that I may be able so to protect myself from Merlin that no harm shall befall me. For when I have drawn all the knowledge that I am able to obtain from him, then I will use that same knowledge to cast such a spell upon him that he shall never be able to harm me or anyone else again. In this I shall play my wit against his wisdom, and my beauty against his cunning, and I believe that I shall win at that game." Then Queen Morgana fell a laughing beyond all measure, and when she had stinted her laughter, she cried, "Hey, Vivien! Certes thou art cunning beyond anything that I ever heard tell of, and I believe that thou art as wicked as thou art cunning. For who ever heard of a child of 15 years old who would speak such word as thou hast just spoken? Or whoever could suppose that so young a girl could conceive the thought of compassing the downfall of the wisest magician who hath ever lived?" Then Queen Morgana Le Fay set to her lips a small whistle of ivory and gold, and blew very shrilly upon it. And in reply there came running a young page of her court. Queen Morgana commanded him to bring her a certain casket of alabaster, cunningly carved and adorned with gold and set with several precious stones. And Queen Morgana opened the box, and took from within it 2 rings of pure yellow gold, beautifully wrought and set, the one ring with a clear white stone of extraordinary brilliance, and the other with a stone as red as blood. Then Queen Morgana said, "Vivien, behold these 2 rings. They possess each a spell of wonderful potency. For if thou wearest that ring with the white stone, whoever weareth the ring with the red stone shall love thee with such a passion of love that thou mayest do with him whatever thou hast a will to do. So take these rings and go to King Arthur's court, and use them as thy cunning may devise." So Vivien took the 2 rings, and gave Queen Morgana Le Fay thanks beyond all measure for them. Now King Arthur took much pleasure in holding a great feast each Pentecost, at which time his court was gathered about him with much mirth and rejoicing. At such times it delighted him to have some excellent entertainment for to amuse himself and his court, wherefore it befell that nearly always something happened that gave much entertainment to the king. So came the feast of Pentecost, and King Arthur sat at the table with a great many noble and lordly folk, and several kings and queens. Now as they all sat at that feast, their spirits greatly expanded with mirth and good cheer. There suddenly came into the hall a very beautiful young damsel, and with her a dwarf, wonderfully misshapen, and of a very hideous countenance. And the maiden was dressed all in flame-colored satin, very rich, and with beautiful embroidery of gold and embroidery of silver. And her hair, which was red like gold, was coiled into a net of gold. And her eyes were black as coals, and extraordinarily bright and glistening. And she had about her throat a necklace of gold of 3 strands, so that with all that gold and those bright garments she shone with wonderful splendor as she entered the hall. Likewise, the dwarf who accompanied her was all clad in flame-colored raiment, and he bore in his hands a cushion of flame-colored silk with tassels of gold, and upon the cushion he bare a ring of exceeding beauty set with a red stone. So when King Arthur beheld this beautiful maiden, he supposed nothing else than that there was some excellent entertainment, and at that he rejoiced a very great deal. But when he looked well at the damsel, it appeared to him that he knew her face, wherefore he said to her, "Damsel, who art thou?" "Sir," she said, "I am the daughter of the King of Northumberland, and my name is Vivien." And thereat King Arthur was satisfied. Then King Arthur said to her, "Lady, what is that thou hast upon yonder cushion, and why hast thou honored us by coming hitherward?" To which Vivien made reply, "Lord, I have here a very good entertainment for to give you pleasure at this feast of Pentecost. For here is a ring of such a sort that only he who is the most wise and the most worthy of all men here present may wear it." And King Arthur said, "Let us see the ring." So Vivien took the ring from the cushion which the dwarf held, and she came and brought it unto King Arthur. And the king took the ring into his own hand, and he perceived that the ring was extraordinarily beautiful, wherefore he said, "Maiden, have I thy leave to try to put this ring upon my finger?" And Vivien said, "Yea, lord." So King Arthur made attempt to place the ring upon his finger, but lo, the ring shrank in size so that it would not pass beyond the first joint thereof. Wherefore King Arthur said, "It would appear that I am not worthy to wear this ring." Then the damsel, Vivien, said, "Have I my lord's leave to offer this ring to others of his court?" And King Arthur said, "Let the others try the ring." So Vivien took the ring to the various folk of the court, both lords and ladies, but not one of these could wear the ring. Then last of all, Vivien came to the place where Merlin sat, where she kneeled upon the ground before him and offered the ring to him. And Merlin, because this concerned himself, could not forecast into the future to know that harm was intended to him. Nevertheless, he looked sourly upon the damsel, and he said, "Child, what is this silly trick thou offerest me?" "Sir," quoth Vivien, "I beseech you for to try this ring upon your finger." Then Merlin regarded the damsel more closely, and he perceived that she was very beautiful, wherefore his heart softened towards her a great deal. So he spake more gently unto her, and he said, "Wherefore should I take the ring?" To the which she made reply, "Because I believe that thou art the most wise and the most worthy of any man in all this place, wherefore the ring should belong to thee." Then Merlin smiled, and took the ring and placed it upon his finger, and lo, it fitted the finger exactly. Thereupon Vivien cried out, "See, the ring hath fitted his finger, and he is the most wise and the most worthy." And Merlin was greatly pleased that the ring which the beautiful damsel had given him had fitted his finger in that way. Then, after a while, he would have withdrawn the ring, but, behold, he could not, for the ring had grown to his finger, as though it were a part of the flesh and the bone thereof. At this Merlin became much troubled in spirit and very anxious, for he did not understand what might be meant by the magic of the ring. So he said, "Lady, whence came this ring?" And Vivien said, "Sir, thou knowest all things. Dost thou then not know that this ring was sent hitherward from Morgana La Fay?" Then again Merlin was greatly a doubt, and he said, "I hope there may be no evil in this ring." And Vivien smiled upon him and said, "What evil could there be in it?" Now by this time the great magic that was in the ring began to work upon Merlin's spirit, wherefore he regarded Vivien very steadily, and suddenly he took great pleasure in her beauty. Then the magic of the ring gat entire hold upon him, and lo, a wonderful passion immediately seized upon his heart, and wrung it, so that it was pierced as with a violent agony. And Vivien beheld what passed in Merlin's mind, and she laughed and turned away. And several others who were there also observed the very strange manner in which Merlin regarded her, wherefore they said among themselves, "Of a surety Merlin is bewitched by the beauty of that young damsel." So after that time the enchantment of the ring of Morgana Le Fay so wrought upon Merlin's spirit that he could in no wise disentangle himself from Vivien's witchery. For from that day forth, whithersoever she went, there he might be found not far away. And if she was in the garden, he would be there, and if she was in the hall, he also would be there, and if she went a hawking, he would also be a horseback. And all the court observed these things, and many made themselves merry and jested upon it. But Vivien hated Merlin with all her might, for she saw that they all made merry at that folly of Merlin's, and he wearied her with his regard. But she dissembled this disregard before his face, and behaved to him in all ways as though she had a great friendship for him. Now it happened upon a day that Vivien sat in the garden, and it was wonderfully pleasant summer weather. And Merlin came into the garden, and beheld Vivien where she sat. But when Vivien perceived Merlin coming, she suddenly felt so great a disregard for him that she could not bear for to be nigh to him at this time. Wherefore she arose in haste with intent to escape from him. But Merlin hurried and overtook her, and he said to her, "Child, do you then hate me?" And Vivien said, "Sir, I do not hate you." But Merlin said, "In very truth I believe that you do hate me." And Vivien was silent. Then, in a little, Merlin said, "I would that I knew what I might do for you, so that you would cease to hate me. for I find that I have a wonderful love for you." Upon this, Vivien looked at Merlin very strangely, and by she said, "Sir, if you would only impart your wisdom and your cunning unto me, then I believe I could love you a very great deal. For behold, I am but as a young child in knowledge, and thou art so old and so wise that I am afraid of thee. If thou wouldest teach me thy wisdom, so that I might be thine equal, then haply I might grow to have such a regard for thee as thou wouldest have me feel." Upon this, Merlin looked very steadily at Vivien, and he said, "Damsel, thou art, certes, no such foolish child as thou dost proclaim thyself to be, for I see that thine eyes are very bright with a cunning beyond thy years. Now I misdoubt that if I should teach thee that wisdom which thou dost desire to possess, either it would be thy undoing, or else it would be to my undoing." Then Vivien cried out with a very loud, piercing voice, "Merlin, if thou dost love me, teach me thy wisdom and the cunning of thy magic, and then I will love thee beyond anyone else in all the world." But Merlin sighed very deeply, for his heart misgave him. Then by he said, "Vivien, thou shalt have thy will, and I will teach thee all those things of wisdom and magic that thou desirest to know." Upon this, Vivien was filled with such vehement agony of joy that she did not dare to let Merlin look into her countenance, lest he should read what was therein written. Wherefore she cast down her eyes and turned her face away from him. Then in a little while she said, "Master, when wilt thou teach me that wisdom?" To this Merlin made reply, "I shall not teach thee today, nor tomorrow, nor at this place, for I can only teach thee those knowledges in such solitude that there shall be nothing to disturb thy studies. But tomorrow thou shalt tell King Arthur that thou must return unto thy father's kingdom. Then we will depart together, accompanied by thy court, and when we have come to some secluded place, there I will build a habitation by the means of my magic, and we shall abide therein until I have instructed thee in wisdom." Then Vivien made great joy, and she caught Merlin's hand in hers, and she kissed his hand with great passion. So the next day Vivien besought King Arthur that he would give her leave to return unto her father's court. And upon the third day she and Merlin and a number of attendants, who were in service upon the damsel, quitted the court of King Arthur, and departed through to go upon their way to the kingdom of Northumberland. But after they had gone some little distance from the court of the king, they turned to the eastward and took their way toward a certain valley of which Merlin was acquainted, and which was so fair and pleasant a place that it was sometimes called the Valley of Delight, and sometimes the Valley of Joyousness. Chapter 2. How Merlin journeyed with Vivien unto the Valley of Joyousness, and how he builded for her a castle at that place. Also, how he taught her the wisdom of magic, and of how she compassed his downfall thereby. So Merlin and Vivien and those who were with them travelled for 3 days to the eastward, until, toward the end of the 3rd day, they reached the confines of a very dark and dismal forest. And there they beheld before them trees so thickly interwoven together that the eyes could not see anything at all of the sky because of the thickness of the foliage. And they beheld the branches and the roots of the trees, that they appeared like serpents all twisted together. Wherefore Vivien said, "Sir, this is a very dismal woodland." "Yea," said Merlin, "so it appeareth to be. Natheless, there lieth within this forest that place which is called by some the Valley of Joyousness, and by others the Valley of Delight, because of the great beauty of that place. And there are several pathways extending through this forest, by the means of which that valley may be reached by a man, whether a horse or a foot." And after a while they found it was as Merlin said, for they came by and by upon one of those pathways, and entered it, and penetrated into the forest. And lo, within that doleful woodland it was so dark that it appeared as though night-time had fallen, although it was bright daylight beyond the borders thereof, wherefore many of that party were very much afraid. But Merlin ever gave them good cheer, and so they went forward upon their way. So by and by they came out at last from that place, and into the open again, whereat they were greatly rejoiced, and took much comfort. Now by this time the evening had come, very peaceful and tranquil, and they beheld beneath them a valley spread out in that light, and it was wonderfully beautiful. And in the center of the valley was a small lake, so smooth and clear, like to crystal, that it appeared like an oval shield of pure silver laid down upon the ground. And all about the margin of the lake were level meadows covered over with an incredible multitude of flowers of divers colors and kinds, very beautiful to behold. When Vivien saw this place, she cried unto Merlin, Master, this is indeed a very joyous valley, for I do not believe that the blessed meadows of paradise are more beautiful than this. And Merlin said, Very well, let us go down into it. So they went down, and, as they descended, the night fell apace, and the round moon arose into the sky, and it was hard to tell whether that valley was the more beautiful in the daytime, or whether it was the more beautiful when the moon shone down upon it in that wise. So they all came at last unto the borders of the lake, and they perceived that there was neither house nor castle at that place. Now upon this the followers of Merlin murmured amongst themselves, saying, This enchanter hath brought us hitherward, but how will he now provide for us that we may find a resting place that may shelter us from the inclement changes of the weather? For the beauty of this spot cannot alone shelter us from rain and storm. And Merlin overheard their murmurings, and he said, Peace, take ye no trouble upon that matter, for I will very soon provide ye a good resting place. Then he said to them, Stand ye a little distance aside, till I show ye what I shall do. So they withdrew a little, as he commanded them, and he and Vivien remained where they were. And Vivien said, Master, what wilt thou do? And Merlin said, Wait a little, and thou shalt see. Therewith he began a certain very powerful conjuration, so that the earth began for to tremble and to shake, and an appearance as of a great red dust arose into the air. And in this dust there began to appear sundry shapes and forms, and these shapes and forms arose very high into the air, and by those who gazed thereon perceived that there was a great structure apparent in the midst of the cloud of red dust. Then after a while all became quiet, and the dust slowly disappeared from the air, and behold, there was the appearance of a marvelous castle such as no one there had ever beheld before, even in a dream. For the walls thereof were of ultramarine and vermilion, and they were embellished and adorned with figures of gold, wherefore that castle showed in the moonlight like as it were a pure vision of great glory. Now Vivien beheld all that Merlin had accomplished, and she went unto him and kneeled down upon the ground before him, and took his hand and set it to her lips. And while she kneeled thus, she said, Master, this is assuredly the most wonderful thing in the world. Wilt thou then teach me such magic that I may be able to build a castle like this castle out of the elements? And Merlin said, Yea, all this I will teach thee, and more besides, for I will teach thee not only how thou mayest create such a structure as this out of invisible things, but will also teach thee how thou mayest, with a single touch of thy wand, dissipate that castle instantly into the air, even as a child with a stroke of a straw may dissipate a beautiful shining bubble, which upon an instant is, and upon another instant is not. And I will teach thee more than that, for I will teach thee how to change and transform a thing into the semblance of a different thing, and I will teach thee spells and charms, such as thou didst never hear tell of before. Then Vivien cried out, Master, thou art the most wonderful man in all the world. And Merlin looked upon Vivien, and her face was very beautiful in the moonlight, and he loved her a very great deal. Wherefore he smiled upon her and said, Vivien, dost thou still hate me? And she said, Nay, master. But she spake not the truth, for in her heart she was evil, and the heart of Merlin was good. and that which is evil will always hate that which is good. Wherefore, though Vivian lusted for the knowledge of necromancy, and though she spake so lovingly with her lips, yet in her spirit she both feared and hated Merlin because of his wisdom. For she wist right well that, except for the enchantment of that ring which he wore, Merlin would not love her any longer in that wise. Wherefore she said in her heart, if Merlin teaches me all of his wisdom, then the world cannot contain both him and me. Now Merlin abided with Vivien in that place for a year and a little more, and in that time he taught her all of magic that he was able to impart. So at the end of that time he said unto her, Vivien, I have now taught thee so much that I believe there is no one in all the world who knoweth more than thou dost of these things of magic which thou hast studied in this time. For not only hast thou such power of sorcery that thou canst make the invisible elements take form at thy will, and not only canst thou transform at thy will one thing into the appearance of an altogether different thing, but thou hast such potent magic in thy possession that thou mayest entangle any living soul into the meshes thereof, unless that one hath some very good talisman to defend himself from thy wiles. Nor have I myself very much more power than this that I have given to thee. So said Merlin, and Vivien was filled with great joy, and she said in her heart, Now, Merlin, if I have the good fortune to entangle thee in my spells, then shalt thou never behold the world again. Now, when the next day had come, Vivien caused a very noble feast to be prepared for herself and Merlin, and by means of the knowledge which Merlin had imparted to her, she produced a certain very potent sleeping potion, which was altogether without taste. This potion she herself infused into a certain noble wine, and the wine she poured into a golden chalice of extraordinary beauty. So when that feast was ended, and while she and Merlin sat together, Vivien said, Master, I have a mind to do thee a great honour. And Merlin said, What is it? Thou shalt see, said Vivien. Therewith she smote her hands together, and there immediately came a young page unto where they were. And he bare that chalice of wine in his hand, and gave it unto Vivien. Then Vivien took the chalice, and she went to where Merlin sat, and kneeled down before him, and said, Sir, I beseech thee to take this chalice, and to drink the wine that is within it. For as that wine is both very noble and very precious, so is thy wisdom both very noble and very precious. And as the wine is contained within a chalice of priceless cost, so is thy wisdom contained within a life that hath been beyond all value to the world. Therewith she set her lips to the chalice, and kissed the wine that was in it. Then Merlin suspected no evil, but he took the chalice, and quaffed of the wine with great cheerfulness. After that, in a little, the fumes of that potent draught began to arise into the brains of Merlin, and it was as though a cloud descended upon his sight. And when this came upon him, he was presently aware that he was betrayed, wherefore he cried out thrice in a voice very bitter and full of agony, Woe, woe, woe! And then he cried out, I am betrayed! And therewith he strove to arise from where he sat, but he could not. That while Vivien sat with her chin upon her hands, and regarded him very steadily, smiling strangely upon him. So presently Merlin ceased his struggles, and sank into a sleep so deep that it was almost as though he had gone dead. When that had happened, Vivien arose, and leaned over him, and set a very powerful spell upon him. And she stretched out her forefinger, and wove an enchantment all about him, so that it was as though he was entirely encompassed with a silver web of enchantment. And when she had ended, Merlin could move neither hand nor foot, nor even so much as a finger-tip, but was altogether like some great insect that a cunning and beautiful spider had enmeshed in a net of fine, strong web. Now when the next morning had come, Merlin awoke from his sleep, and he beheld that Vivien sat over against him, regarding him very narrowly. And they were in the same room in which he had fallen asleep. And when Vivien perceived that Merlin was awake, she laughed, and said, Merlin, how is it with thee? And Merlin groaned with great passion, saying, Vivien, thou hast betrayed me. At this, Vivien laughed again very shrilly and piercingly, and she said, Behold, Merlin, thou art altogether in my power, for thou art utterly interwoven in those enchantments which thou thyself hast taught me. For lo, thou canst not move a single hair without my will, and when I leave thee, the world shall see thee no more, and all thy wisdom shall be my wisdom, and all thy power shall be my power, and there shall be no other in the world who shall possess the wisdom that I possess. Then Merlin groaned with such fervor that it was as though his heart would burst asunder. And he said, Vivien, thou hast brought me to such shame that even were I released from this spell, I could not endure that any man should ever see my face again. For I grieve not for my undoing so much as I grieve at the folly that hath turned mine own wisdom against me to my destruction. So I forgive thee all the things that thou hast done to me to betray me. Yet there is one thing alone which I crave of thee. And Vivien said, Does it concern thee? And Merlin said, No, it concerns another. Thereupon Vivien said, What is it? Then Merlin said, It is this. Now I have received my gift of foresight again, and I perceive that King Arthur is presently in great peril of his life. So I beseech thee, Vivien, that thou wilt straightway go to where he is in danger, and that thou wilt use thy powers of sorcery for to save him. Thus, by fulfilling this one good deed, thou shalt haply lessen the sin of this that thou hast done to betray me. Now at that time, Vivien was not altogether bad as she afterward became, for she still felt some small pity for Merlin, and some small reverence for King Arthur. Wherefore now she laughed and said, Very well, I will do thy desire in this matter. Whither shall I go to save that king? Then Merlin replied, Go into the west country, and unto the castle of a certain knight, hight Sir Domas de Noir. And when thou comest there, thou shalt immediately see how thou mayest be of aid to the good king. Upon this, Vivien said, I will do this thing for thee, for it is the last favor that anyone may ever render unto thee in this world. Therewith Vivien smote her hands together, and summoned many of her attendants. And when these had come in, she presented Merlin before them. And she said, Behold how I have bewitched him. Go, see for yourself, feel of his hands and his face, and see if there be any life in him. And they went to Merlin and felt of him, his hands and arms and his face, and even they plucked at his beard, and Merlin could not move in any wise, but only groaned with great dolour. So they all laughed and made them merry at his woeful state. Then Vivien caused it by means of her magic that there should be in that place a great coffer of stone, and she commanded those who were there that they should lift Merlin up and lay him therein, and they did as she commanded. Then she caused it that, by means of her magic, there should be placed a huge slab of stone upon the coffer, such as 10 men could hardly lift, and Merlin lay beneath the stone, like one who was dead. Then Vivien caused it to be that the magic castle should instantly disappear, and so it befell as she willed. Then she caused it that a mist should arise at that place, and the mist was of such a sort that no one could penetrate into it, or sever it asunder, nor could any human eye see within it. Then, when she had done all this, she went her way with all of her court from that valley, making great joy in that she had triumphed over Merlin. Nevertheless she did not forget her promise, but went to the castle of Sir Domas de Noir, and after a while it shall all be told how it befell at that place. Such was the passing of Merlin, and God grant it that you may not so misuse the wisdom he giveth you to have, that it may be turned against you to your undoing. For there can be no greater bitterness in the world than this, that a man shall be betrayed by one to him he himself hath gifted the power of betraying him. And now we turn unto King Arthur, to learn how it fell with him after Merlin had thus been betrayed to his undoing. And I think we will stop there for today. Next time we will pick up with Vivien and King Arthur. and see how the Book of Merlin ends out. But until then, make sure to like and subscribe. And if you feel like it, follow me on any of these social medias, including over on Patreon. Patrons get extra bonuses like their name in the credits, secret videos, and other videos a week early. This has been Classical Titerature. Thanks for watching.